Hello and welcome everyone to the part 2 of this tutorial series. I'm Sparsha from Postprocess Studios, and today I'll be populating my scene with some 3D assets, and I'll be changing up the atmosphere to make this scene look like an alien planet. So first thing is, I'm just going to bring in a camera and set this to somewhere around here. Alright, I'm just going to tweak a few settings over here. This is not necessary, but if you want, you can do this. So the reason that I brought in a camera is we want to populate our scene according to what the camera is doing. If we're recording a cinematic, we don't need to populate our whole landscape. We just want the area what the camera is looking at. So this is why it is very important to set up a camera before you start populating your scene. So I'm just going to pin my camera over here, and you guys can see, you can see the horizon from over here, but we're going to want to hide this as best as we can. So I'm just going to populate this with some mountains. So I already downloaded some background mountains for this project, and I'm just going to populate this. Make this just like so. So if you don't have assets for mountains, what you can do is you can go over to Fav and search for mountains, and you're going to see there are a bunch of free models over here that you can use to make mountains. Also, you can create mountains inside Blender as well, but this is completely up to you. So after adding the background mountains, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some bones. So I'm just going to grab this. You can see that our mesh has its pivot point all the way over here, but this is going to cause some issues when we are scaling and rotating our object. So we want to fix that. So if I select my mesh and then head over to the modeling mode and then go over to the miscellaneous tab and then click on the pivot actor. Now I can just simply readjust this just like so and hit accept. Now this is going to set our pivot point accordingly. I'm also going to show you guys how you can fix this pivot point issue inside of Blender as well, because the Unreal Engine method can be clunky at times, because when you're copying the same object over and over again, it might revert back the pivot point back to where it was. So first thing what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up the content browser and locate my mesh. So as you can see, this is in skeleton mesh format, but I want this to be a static mesh. So let's just convert that. So I'm just going to open this up, and you can see there is a button to do that. So I'm just going to click on it, and I'm just going to save this file and call this spine underscore bone, and it's saved. Now if I click on here, this is going to open up this mesh. So after converting, I'm going to locate my mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this onto the scene and click on my details panel and reset its location. Okay, then I'm going to hit F to locate this. Then I'm going to go to files and then export selected. I'm just going to export this on my documents folder. So I'm just going to call this spine underscore bone, and it's saved. And you should uncheck all of these because you're not going to need all of these options. So yeah, and also remember to check if it's FBX 2013. Alright, let's hit export. After it's done exporting, I'm going to open up Blender. Then I'm just going to delete this cube, hit on file, then hit import. Because I imported my mesh into FBX, I'm going to select FBX, and then I'm going to locate my file. It's called spine underscore bone, hit import. So as you can see, we have our mesh here. As you guys can see, this is already selected, but inside of Blender, the darker orange shade means this is not an active selection. But if I select it again, you see the outline is a lighter shade of orange, so that means this is a current selection. Okay, with that out of the way, you guys can see that our origin point is way over here, and also our 3D cursor is way over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line this up. So I'm going to hit G and then press Z to move it on the Z axis. Then I'm just going to drag it down just like so. Then I'm going to hit G again, and then I'm going to hit Y to move it on the Y axis just like so. Let's do a check. Also, one thing you can do to check if it's perfectly centered or not, what you can do is click on this option. This is going to give you an orthographic view. So if I check it on the x-axis, you can see we can do a little bit of adjustment. So I'm just going to move it on the y-axis just a little bit, just like so. Then I'm going to check the z-axis. Click on here. I mean, this looks centered. Alright, and then after doing all of that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on object and click on set origin and set the origin to the 3D cursor. Now if I move here, you can see that our origin is set here. Just to be sure, I'm just going to hold down Ctrl then press A, and I'm just going to click on apply to all transform. So what this does is this makes the transform of the mesh native, so everything is going to be reset to 0. Alright, then our mesh is ready to export. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on export and export as FBX. I'm just going to overwrite my previous file. So I'm just going to select this, and then from here I just want to select the mesh. So just click on mesh and we should be good to go. Now I'm going to hit export. Okay, after exporting, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of this from here, and I'm just going to import my mesh. So if I click on add and click on here, and from my documents, if I scroll down, I can see this spine bone. So I'm going to hit open. So you're going to see this menu pop up. You can leave this at default and it should import properly. So I'm just going to click on import. You're going to see that this has brought in our mesh. So if I place this in my scene now, you're going to see that our pivot point is now properly placed. So yeah, this is how you can this is another method you can use to fix your pivot points. I prefer the second method using Blender, but it is up to you whichever method you want to use. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place this in my scene. Something like this. Then I'm just going to bring in another bone, just like so, and scale this, something like this. Then I'm going to try to replicate a rib cage, and copy this, change up the placement just a little bit. So now if I hide my mannequin, we can see that our scene is coming together really nicely. So I'm just going to do some more randomization. And I'm just going to lay some bones on the ground. Just like so. if I head over to my landscape grass and add another index, and in here I can add that skull just like so, and the density should be somewhere around 30, and I'm just going to scale this to, let's say, 5 up to, let's say, 7, and I'm just going to hit save. This is obviously way too much. Let's decrease the density. I'm just going to set this to 2, save. So now we have little skulls on the ground. Okay, our scene is coming together nicely. Now we want to add some textures for this bone. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new material, and I'm just going to give this a base color of something off-white like this, and I'm just going to set the roughness to 1. Now I'm just going to grab a normal from my sand texture and just plug this in. I mean, this is not perfect, but this is a hacky way to do this. And if I hit save and apply this material, now I'm just going to do the same for all of these objects. Just going to select them. One good thing to remember that there is a shortcut for selecting all the similar objects that you have in your scene. So as you can see, I have a bunch of these bones. So if I hit shift then press E, it's just going to select all of the similar assets. So what I can do is I can just click on here and replace this. So as you guys can see, our ground looks a little bit bland and does not have any 3D deformation. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to head over to Pixel Megascans and head over to 3D assets and search for ground. You can use something like this. So I'm just going to grab this. So I'm just going to bring this in and scale this like so, and then I'm just going to try and populate this scene with these ground planes. So try and rotate this so you get a bit of variation. So I'm just going to do this over and over again till I have something that I'm satisfied with. Okay, now I'm just going to try and adjust the colors for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select one of these assets and head over to the material, double click this, and I can see there is something called Tint. So I'm just going to enable this and click on here to change the tint. So I'm just going to use the eyedropper tool to get something close. Now you can see that this is a little bit too oversaturated. So in order to fix that, I'm just going to click on albedo controls. Then I'm just going to decrease the saturation. Increase the brightness just a little bit. So I think this looks okay. So I'm just going to head on back to my scene. You can see there is a little bit of discoloration here. So I'm just going to try and fix them. So what I'm going to do is try and change this. Do something like this. And for the saturation, contrast, I'm just going to use this. Increase the brightness slightly. Now this looks almost identical to our ground. So I think we're done with populating the scene. Let's move on over to our atmospherics. The first thing what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look for exponential height form. So I'm just going to select this and head on to the details panel for this. So I'm just going to search for volumetric form. So I'm just going to click and enable this. You guys can see the difference that it makes. So if I disable this and if I enable this now, you're going to see that by enabling this, this is absorbing the color from the ground and casting it onto our form. So this is going to help us with our realism. So after doing that, I'm just going to increase the fog density, just like so, and change the height fall off, readjust the density till we get something like this, because we want to have a silhouette. Now let's head on over to our sky atmosphere. So if I select this component over here, you're going to see there are a bunch of options, but we're going to stick with a few of these. So I'm going to change the my scattering scale and the my scattering color. So if I increase and decrease this, you're going to see how our scene changes. So how this works is, so if you want to apply a color, you have to keep in mind that whatever color you want to apply to this has to be the direct opposite of the color that you want. So in here I want to make my scene more red. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide this slider over to the blue and slightly increase the scattering scale. You're going to notice that our scene is becoming warmer and warmer. So I'm just going to keep it at somewhere around here and change this tint just a tad bit. And this is completely up to you how you want to direct your scene. So yeah. And now for the my absorption scale, what I'm going to do is, so this is also similar to the scattering scale. So I'm just going to set a value that is opposite to the color that I want. I'm just going to pick a blue tint and I'm just going to slightly increase this until I get something like this. So you can see our scene is already starting to look like a alien planet. I'm just going to decrease this just a little bit so I get back my volumetric fog. Now you can also play around with the atmosphere absorption as well. Right now this is set to green. I'm just going to push it over to somewhere around this bluish color and I'm just going to increase the scale slightly. Try to adjust this till we get something like this. Now if I hit Ctrl and L and if I move the sun, and then I'm just going to readjust. Now I'm just going to head over to my directional light and I'm just going to look for source angle. So if I change the source angle, you're going to notice that our sun is going to change its size. So if I increase it, you're going to see that our sun gets larger and larger, and if I decrease this is going to get smaller and smaller. So I'm just going to make this somewhere around here, and while I'm here, I'm just going to enable the bloom. So I'm just going to search for bloom and enable this light shed bloom over here, so we get this nice bloom. So this is obviously way too strong. I want to decrease this to maybe, let's say 2, to maybe, let's say something like 20. Okay, this looks alright. Now I want to out-direct my volumetric clouds a little bit, so I'm just going to search for volumetric clouds, and in here I'm just going to change the layer altitude somewhere like this, and change the layer height something like this until I get something that I like. Also, if I go over to my directional light and if I search for cloud, so we're going to see there is the option to cast cloud shadows. If I enable this, our clouds are going to cast some shadows. So let's try and move the directional light just a little bit. Yeah, something like this looks okay. Now what I want to do is I want to bring in a post-process volume. So if I click on my place actors panel and click on here and look for post-process volume. Now if I bring this in, first thing I'm just going to make this unbound. Search for unbound in the details panel and click on infinite extent. So I'm just going to enable this. By clicking this is now going to affect everything on our scene. So in here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look for exposure, and I'm just going to enable the maturing mode and change this to manual. And you're going to notice that everything in our scene just got dark. So in order to fix that, I'm just going to click on exposure compensation, and I'm going to put in a value of something like 7 or maybe 9, I guess. Still too low. Let's try something like 14. Yeah, this looks okay. But now if I go over to my directional light and increase the intensity from here, I can set this to something like 30 or maybe let's say 35. You're going to see that we're getting our exposure back. So I think I should decrease the bloom just a little bit. So maybe like 10. This looks okay. Then I'm just going to readjust the intensity to maybe like 40. Now in my post-process volume, I'm just going to try and color grade this scene until I find something that looks okay. So if I scroll down onto color grading, I'm going to see a bunch of options over here. So in the global, what I'm going to do is try and calibrate the saturation. So I'm just going to push this way over here. Try and decrease the saturation just a little bit. And then inside the contrast, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase the contrast just a little bit. And then inside gamma, I'm just going to slightly increase this. And put the color to somewhere over here. So inside the shadows, I'm just going to try and increase the contrast just a little bit. So I'm going to try something like 1.1, maybe 1.2. Yeah, this looks okay. Now inside the post-process volume, I'm just going to look for something called bloom. And I'm just going to change the method to convolutional and then change the intensity. So I'm just going to go for something like 3 and change the convolution scattered dispersion to something like 4, maybe 3, I guess. Now you can see that our sun is being overexposed. So now in order to fix that, I'm just going to search for directional light, and I'm just going to decrease the source angle just a little bit. I'm just going to set this to something like this and try and move the sun just a little bit. And I'm just going to change the intensity to somewhere around 90. And then if I go back to my post-process volume, if I change my exposure, threshold exposure, and set this to something like 11, it's a bit too dim. If I set this to something like 13, now this looks okay. And now for the bloom, the intensity is set to 2 and the convolution scatter dispersion is set to 3. So this looks okay. And now what I want to do is I want to change the color of this volumetric fog. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to search for fog and click on exponential height fog. So I'm just going to change this sky atmosphere color scale. So if I click on this and move the slider around until I get something I like, something like this works. So in the post-process volume, I'm just going to try and increase the exposure just a little bit. I'm going to set this to 13.5. I hit enter. Now to add more depth to the scene, I'm just going to use some fog cards. So I have an asset called Easy Fog that I'm going to use here. So if you guys want, you guys can make your own fog cards. If you go over to Google and search for Cloud Alpha Maps and make a mask material with this, you can end up with something like this. So this is obviously way too bright, so I'm just going to increase the slider in here until I get something like this. And now in the color intensity, I'm just going to decrease this just a little bit. And for the emissive, I'm just going to decrease this and decrease the density just a little bit. Now I'm just going to scale my fog part just like so. And I'm just going to use a bunch of these to populate my scene. Scale this down. Scale this down as well. Until we get something like this. So since this is a alien planet, we can get creative with how many suns we can use. So if we want a second sun light, what we can do is, if I look for directional light, I can copy and paste this and search for index. You're going to see there is a atmosphere sunlight index. So I'm just going to set this to 1. And now you can see there's an error over here. So this is saying that this needs to have a priority for which sun is going to do all the shading. So I'm just going to search for forward shading priority and set this to 1. And this should get rid of this message. And now you can see that our scene is a lot brighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to decrease the intensity over here to something like 30. Still too much. Maybe something like 10. So now if I eject from my camera and look over here, you're going to notice that we have another sun over here. So I'm just going to pin my camera over here and adjust the rotation of my second directional light. If I change the rotation on the z-axis, I think I should disable the clouds for now so I can view this better. I can also use this gizmo. Now I can also use this gizmo to control my sunlight. So if I do something like this, you're going to notice that our sun is popping out from here. So if I rotate this from somewhere over here, so now if I go over to my post-process settings and search for exposure, I can decrease down the exposure to something like 12. It's a bit too low, maybe like 12.5. And in here, now I just want to change my light color to something bluish. Also, you're going to notice that if I change the color to something bluish, you're going to notice that this also decreases the intensity of the blue. So I'm just going to change the intensity again to something like 5. Okay, now I think this looks alright. So if I head on to my camera again and process this, and if I look at my scene, this is coming together really well. I might just change the position of the directional light just a little bit to somewhere around here. Now if I enable my volume counts, we're going to see how this affects our scene. Let's try and increase the exposure again. So I'm just going to try something 4.8. I think this looks okay. So if I head on over to my sky atmosphere again, I think I can readjust a few things over here. I'm just going to increase the Rayleigh scattering scale just a little bit until the colors look right. Alright, and one thing to keep in mind, these things are not going to be perfect because we're trying to create something that is imaginary. So this is always good to be creative and art direct your scene. You can also look at references from different movies to make your scene look even better, but this is completely up to you. Okay, I think this is it for this video. So if you guys like the video, just hit like and hit the subscribe button because I'm going to be making a part 3 of this tutorial series. So until then, take care and I'll see you in the next one.